The trouble began the instant the ranch became mine. One minute I was stepping onto my father's land for the first time since we put him in the ground. The next, a white SUV slid to a stop in a spray of gravel, like it had been tracking me. The driver's door flew open. A woman in a blazer marched toward me, clutching a stack of papers like a long-awaited prize.
"Ethan Cole," she snapped. "Ridgeway HOA, you're in violation."
I hadn't even reached the porch. Cold chewed through my jacket. The boards under my boots groaned as if waking up. The ranch, my ranch, felt like it was inhaling after a long sleep. I took the notice from her and unfolded it, confusion boiling into anger. "This property isn't part of your HOA." She smiled the way only someone used to obedience can smile. Small, patient, condescending. "We exercise authority over the entire visual perimeter that includes this ranch. Fines begin today." Her SUV idled behind her, low and predatory. Behind me, my father's land stretched out, silent, loyal, unchanged. Yet she spoke like it already belonged to her. I didn't know HOA statutes, but I knew this much. I hadn't just inherited a ranch. I'd inherited a fight, and they were about to lose it. I grew up learning the edges of this ranch the way most kids learn sidewalks and streetlights. Every summer, my father walked the perimeter with me, boots grinding over dry grass, his shadow long across the fence posts. He'd point out a ridge or a bend in the creek and make me repeat the words his own father had used. "Boundaries matter, Ethan. Not to keep people out, but to remind you what you're responsible for." Back then, responsibility was just a word. I only knew that I liked being beside him, the two of us tracing our little forgotten piece of Colorado like explorers. He always carried a small, battered notebook. The leather cover was cracked, corners softened from years in his pocket. Inside were sketches of the land, notes about fences and storms, and tiny details only he seemed to notice. "Why do you write everything down?" I asked once. He tapped the notebook. "Memory fades. Proof doesn't." There's one day I remember with unnatural clarity. We were near the eastern fence line where the hills dropped and the grass grew higher. He knelt beside a broken post and crooking a finger at me. "Come here." His voice dropped, like the ground itself might be listening. "This ranch," he said, wrapping my hand around the splintered wood, "has been fought for, settled, defended, rebuilt, defended again. It isn't just soil. It's a promise." He looked straight at me, blue eyes fierce in the dimming light. "Never let anyone take what's ours." I repeated the words, not understanding how heavy they were. Time has a way of softening declarations. When I turned 18, I left for college, hungry for days that didn't smell like hay and diesel and dawn. My father didn't argue. He just nodded in that way men do when they're proud and breaking at the same time. I promised to visit often. Then internships came, and promotions, and the convenient lie that he was fine with the quiet, that the land was enough, that he didn't need me underfoot. I didn't know that the battles he'd warned me about hadn't faded with age. They'd sharpened. People hinted at it during the funeral. Little comments, awkward pauses. "Your father was a strong man. He had to be. He didn't let them push him around. Stood his ground until he couldn't anymore." I told myself they meant the weather, the years, the stubbornness branded into every rancher who lives too long in one place. It wasn't until I stood in his office, the house dark and hollow around me, that I started to understand. The room smelled of dust and cedar, exactly as it always had. Papers were stacked in precise piles, tools lined up in a neat row, maps pinned to the walls with edges curled from the sun. His old notebook sat on the desk. The elastic was barely hanging on. The leather cover was cracked and smoothed by his hands. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what it might give back or take away. The early pages were familiar, sketches of ridges, notes about calves and storms, reminders to fix gates. But as I flipped forward, the language changed. Lines got tighter, margins filled with dates, complaints, references to letters, references to them. Near the back, a separate sheet was folded so sharply it had creased the page beneath it. My name was at the top. Ethan, if you're reading this, then the fight has reached you. I held the line as long as I could. Some battles don't end with the man who starts them. Don't let them bury this land under their rules. Don't let them take what's ours. The room shrank around me. Air thickened with every conversation we never had. He hadn't just battled drought and time. He'd been fighting people. Pressure. Control. Something creeping across the boundaries he'd once walked with such certainty. And he'd fought it alone, while I chased titles and bonuses and offices that would never know his name. Guilt settled inside me like a final stone. This wasn't just land. It was an unfinished war. And now, it was mine. By the second morning, the ranch felt different. Not quieter, not heavier, watched. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee, hoping the cold might clear my head. A flash of white on the fence post stopped me mid-sip. Another notice, then another. 3 in total, taped so neatly it felt deliberate. Fence deterioration, grass exceeding acceptable height, unauthorized equipment visible from roadway. The unauthorized equipment was my father's old tractor, the same rusted machine that had tilled this soil since before I was born. I tore the notices down one by one. The tape snapped like small insults. Yesterday I could have blamed the first violation on timing. Today, it was a message. I didn't call, I drove. The Ridgeway HOA clubhouse sat at the end of a new, curving road along the ridge. It looked more like a high-end retreat than a neighborhood facility. Wall-to-wall glass, carefully manicured shrubs, imported SUVs lined up in symmetrical rows. What hit me harder than the polish was the proximity. Henry had walked the boundary markers with me the day I arrived. I could still see them in my mind. The clubhouse wasn't just near our line, it seemed to lean against it. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and quiet superiority. Marilyn, because that's who the woman from the SUV turned out to be, was behind the front desk, arranging papers into perfectly squared stacks, as if the world might behave if she sorted it hard enough. When she saw me, her smile thinned. "Mr. Cole, I assume you're here about the notices?" "You assume right." I set them on the counter. 3 violations in 2 days. I haven't even unpacked yet. She slid one toward herself with a manicured finger. "Our standards apply regardless of your personal timetable. Grass above acceptable length, fencing beyond recommended condition, obsolete machinery stored in open view. These are community concerns." "This ranch isn't your community," I said. "It's private property, outside your subdivision, outside your jurisdiction." Her face hardly moved, but something cold shifted behind her eyes. "Your father understood our authority," she replied, voice soft but edged. "He might not have agreed with every guideline, but he complied when it mattered. He respected structure." The words landed harder than they should have. My father, who hated interference, respecting her authority? It didn't fit. "Respect isn't the word you're looking for," I said, "and he sure as hell didn't agree with you." Marilyn straightened, folding her arms. "We maintain visual harmony in Ridgeway. That includes adjacent properties that affect community value. Your ranch is visible from several vantage points within our development, which grants us discretionary oversight." "Discretionary oversight," I repeated. "Show me where that appears in county law." She smiled like she'd been waiting for the cue. "Some homeowners prefer cooperation over confrontation. I hope you're not choosing the latter." Everything about her tone said confrontation was exactly what she wanted. My pulse didn't spike from fear, but from something cleaner, a forming clarity. This wasn't a simple overstep. She was used to making people bend. I leaned in. "Let me make something clear. You don't control my land. Not an inch of it." Her voice dropped to a measured whisper. "Then you leave me no choice but to escalate enforcement. Daily fines, formal complaints, property assessments." She let each word hang. "This can get very uncomfortable for you, Mr. Cole." My jaw tightened. "Do whatever you think you have to. I'm not paying you a dime. You have no right to collect." For the first time, her professional smile cracked, just a hairline fracture, quickly patched but obvious. She was used to submission, not resistance. As I turned to leave, something on the wall caught my eye. A framed aerial map, one of those glossy planning images developers use, showing the Ridgeway subdivision from above. Roads, cul-de-sacs, green patches, and the clubhouse. It sat right at the edge of a faint dotted line. A property line. My father's line. Up close, the building didn't just kiss it. It overlapped, just a sliver, but enough to make my heart start pounding. Not proof, not yet, but the first tug on a buried root. "Is there a problem?" Marilyn's voice sharpened behind me. "Not yet," I said evenly, "but I'm starting to see how there could be." Her eyes narrowed. I didn't turn back. Outside, in the hard daylight, something in the air shifted. She believed she had me boxed in, that she held all the power. She had no idea that she'd just shoved me straight into the fight my father had warned me about. Except I wasn't sick. I wasn't alone. And I was just getting started. 3 days after I'd walked into the clubhouse, the county came to me. I heard tires crunch on gravel and stepped outside, expecting Henry or a delivery. Instead, a man in a county windbreaker stood beside a white utility truck, clipboard in hand, his expression politely resigned. "Mr. Cole," he called, "we received a report of possible septic leakage near your east pasture." I almost laughed. Out there? The east pasture was nothing but parched grass and stubborn soil. It hadn't seen a puddle in months. He sighed, the long breath of someone who'd done this too many times. "The complaint also mentioned improper waste disposal, possibly hazardous. Old machinery leaking contaminants." He flipped a page. "Standard checklist." The language sounded familiar. HOA phrasing dressed up as environmental concern. I walked him out to the pasture. Our boots cracked the frozen ground. He checked the septic cap, took photos, tested for leaks. Everything was sealed and up to code. "I'll mark it unfounded," he said, tucking his clipboard away. Then he hesitated. "If I'm honest, I've been out here before." I stopped. "What do you mean?" He glanced back toward the subdivision, then lowered his voice. Multiple complaints over the years, all anonymous on paper, usually following some dust-up with someone over in Ridgeway. They never panned out. Your father always had his paperwork in order. He paused. I can't say more than that, but keep records. Document everything. He drove off, leaving me alone in the cold with a truth I didn't want but couldn't ignore. This wasn't sudden. It wasn't new. It was inherited. The next hit didn't come on paper. It came through my phone. Henry had insisted I join one of the local town groups just to keep an eye on what they're saying. That morning, my notifications lit up. Someone had posted a roadside photo of my ranch, angled just wrong enough to show rust, not pasture. Caption: "This eyesore is dragging down our property values. New owner refuses to cooperate with Ridgeway standards. Something needs to be done." Comments swarmed like flies. "Disgraceful. Move it or fix it. Why should we suffer because some outsider doesn't care? Typical. Ranch people never think about anyone else." A few voices defended me, but they were drowned by the outrage of neighbors who'd never met me, never set foot on this land, never known my father's name. In less than a day, the ranch that had stood here for generations, the land my father bled for, was reduced to an online punchline. At the grocery store, whispers slid around me. "That's him," a woman muttered to her friend as I passed. "The one trying to ruin the neighborhood." At the feed store, the old man behind the counter avoided my eyes. "Hope you get things sorted," he said, hesitation cutting sharper than the words. By the time I drove back up the gravel drive, a knot had formed under my ribs. I'd been here less than a week, and already I was being isolated, not by distance, but by a carefully manufactured hostility. Rumors move faster than wind across dry grass, and Ridgeway controlled the wind. Restless anger pushed me back into my father's office, searching for something, explanations, directions, maybe a way to feel less alone in a fight he'd been carrying for years. I dug through drawers, old invoices, maintenance logs, boundary maps with hand-drawn notes. Then my hand hit a cardboard box shoved behind a filing cabinet. Correspondence. Keep. Inside were letters, dozens of them, HOA notices reaching back years, some typed, some handwritten, all sharing the same patronizing cadence I recognized from Maryland. Failure to maintain visual standards, non-compliant fencing, unapproved equipment. As I read, the tone escalated. Warnings, threats, final notices. My father's responses stopped me more than the HOA's letters did. At first, he wrote back in full paragraphs, firm, polite reminders that the ranch was outside HOA jurisdiction. Over time, the replies shrank, short, sharp, angry scribbles. In the margins, he'd vented what he didn't send. They think their rules override the law. Harassment, pure harassment. They're pushing harder every year. The last cluster of letters was clipped together, dated from the years he got sick. His handwriting trembled, letters sloping downward like they were tired too. One HOA letter accused him of willful neglect. Another demanded he remove unsightly structures, the barn my grandfather built with his bare hands. My father's final official response was 3 words: "You have no authority." I stared at the sentence until my eyes burned. He had fought this battle with a fading body and a will that refused to give. Without me. At the bottom of the box was a single envelope, folded and refolded like someone had meant to deal with it and couldn't. Inside was a note, not addressed to the HOA. It was to himself. They're building on borrowed time. The words hit harder than any threat Marilyn could throw. Borrowed time. Borrowed land. Borrowed authority. It wasn't poetic. It was literal. Somewhere under all this harassment there was a fault line, and my father had found it before he ran out of strength. By the end of that week, the ranch felt less like a home and more like a battlefield I hadn't chosen. County inspectors, online attacks, sideways looks in town. I needed help. I knew exactly who to ask. Henry Dawson lived half a mile west, on land his family had worked longer than mine. He'd stood at my father's funeral, hat to his chest, offering condolences with the quiet weight of a man who'd buried too many neighbors. When I pulled into his driveway that afternoon, he stepped out onto his porch like he'd been expecting me. "Ethan," he tipped his head. "Figured you'd come by sooner or later." "You knew something was going on," I said. He motioned me inside. His cabin was warm and worn, smelling like wood smoke, old paper, and coffee brewed in the same pot for decades. He dropped into his chair with a sigh. "Ridgeway HOA," he muttered. "Biggest infestation this valley's seen since the grasshopper plague of '89. Your father fought 'em tooth and nail. Stubborn old mule." He gave a brief, fond smile. But he was right. "What were they actually trying to pull?" I asked. Henry scratched his jaw. "Started small. Complaints about old tractors, fences, dust. Then they got ambitious, tried to claim visual authority over every property touching their subdivision. Some folks caved, too tired to fight. Your dad didn't." His eyes hardened. "That Marilyn? She don't take kindly to the word no." This wasn't gossip. It was memory. He shoved aside a stack of magazines and pulled a cardboard tube from beneath the table. He uncapped it and slid out several rolled documents. "County surveys," he said. "Official ones. Before Ridgeway bought up land for that fancy clubhouse." He flattened one on the table. The lines were faded but clear. Henry tapped the thick black outline of my family's ranch. "Now," he said, spreading an overlay on top, "look here." The development map settled over the survey. Neat cul-de-sacs, the clubhouse, the pool. The clubhouse, Ridgeway's pride, sat bloated at the edge of my father's line. Only it wasn't just on the edge. It bled over it. "You're sure?" I asked quietly. Henry snorted. "Son, I was a surveyor 40 years. I don't guess about lines. That building's sitting where it doesn't belong, and your father knew it." His voice softened. He just didn't have much fight left near the end. Electric anger and grim understanding crackled together in my chest. If the clubhouse overlapped our boundary, the HOA wasn't just overreaching. They were trespassing, building, operating, profiting on land they didn't own. "I need a lawyer," I said. Henry nodded. "You need the right one. Someone who knows dirt law and doesn't scare easy when an HOA starts puffing up." He scratched a name and number on a scrap of paper. "Ava Merrick, young, sharp, hates bullies. Your dad talked to her once, but by then his health—" He let the sentence die. He couldn't chase it. The idea that my father had reached for help, alone, and hadn't lived long enough to see it through hit harder than I expected. I called Ava that evening. Her voice was clear, controlled, and warmer than I'd braced for. "Mr. Cole," she said after I laid out the situation, "I'd like to see the property and your documents in person. This doesn't sound small." She arrived the next morning, A slim woman with dark hair pulled back, glasses perched on her nose, legal pad tucked under one arm. She had the posture of someone who made problems nervous. We walked the boundary first. She paused at markers, measured distances with a rangefinder, took photos, made notes. When she reached the stretch behind the clubhouse, she went very still. Then we laid Henry's maps out on my kitchen table. Her eyes narrowed the moment she matched the old county survey to the Ridgeway overlay. "This isn't a mistake," she murmured. "This is a clear encroachment." She looked up. "And that clubhouse is a major liability if it's sitting on your land. But we need recorded proof of how this happened." "Henry mentioned they might have had a lease," I said. "Exactly. HOAs sometimes negotiate land use with neighbors to build facilities. If they did, there should be something filed with the county." We drove to the recorder's office, a beige building that smelled like paper and stale coffee. Ava filed a request. The clerk disappeared into the back and re-emerged with a thick file folder. On the top was a brittle, yellowing document. "The lease," Ava said quietly. My grandfather's name was at the bottom in steady ink. Opposite was the original Ridgeway Association. The terms were simple: a 30-year lease granting use of a 12-acre strip for recreational structures and amenities. Renewal would require written agreement from both parties. Ava turned to the date. 1982, she read. 30 years takes us to 2012. Her finger slid slowly down the last page. "Do you see a renewal, Ethan?" I didn't. Neither did she. She checked every attachment, every stamp, every note. Finally, she looked up, voice low and certain. "They've been operating on your land without permission for 8 years. The room seemed to tilt. 8 years of trespass. 8 years of pool memberships and parties and HOA fees flowing through a building planted illegally on our side of the line. 8 years of harassment aimed at a dying man instead of a simple, lawful conversation. "Ethan," she said, her tone sharpening, "this isn't a paperwork oversight. This is serious exposure. And based on how aggressively they've come after you, I'd say they know, or at least suspect, exactly what they've done." "Marilyn told me my father understood their authority," I said. Ava's expression hardened. "No, he understood a lease. And when he didn't renew it, he understood his rights." She closed the folder gently. "They gambled he'd die before anyone noticed. They were almost right." My father's scribbled words surfaced in my mind. They're building on borrowed time. For the first time, I understood they weren't metaphor. We left the recorder's office with a file under Ava's arm and the weight of a truth my father had died carrying. As we crossed the parking lot, she slid on her sunglasses. "They used your land, built on it, profited off it," she said. "And then they had the audacity to threaten you." "Where do we go from here?" I asked. She opened the car door. "Now," she said, "we make them answer for it." Marilyn didn't expect me to walk into the HOA office looking calm, a folder tucked under my arm. That was the first crack. Her hands stilled over a stack of violation forms when she saw me. The lemon cleaner and smug order of the room smelled different now that I understood what lay underneath. "Mr. Cole," she said, smoothing her blouse, "if this is about the fines, they will not be waived. Not for sentimental reasons, not for anyone." "I'm not here about fines," I said. "I'm here about something you forgot." Her smile twitched. "Forgot? That's unlikely." I opened the folder just enough to show the edge of yellowed paper. Her gaze latched onto it. "We'll talk inside," she said quickly. She led me into their glass-walled conference room, the one where her board had surely rubber-stamped years of petty power plays. 5 board members sat around the long table, murmuring politely. When Marilyn entered, they straightened like soldiers. When I followed, their expressions turned wary.
"This is Mr. Cole," she announced. "He's confused about certain boundary matters. We'll clarify them so he can comply like every responsible neighbor."
"Comply," I repeated, pulling out a chair but remaining on my feet.
"No, I'm here to correct a lie."
A rustle of discomfort passed through the room. The treasurer frowned.
"Marilyn, what's he talking about?" "Nothing of substance," she said tightly. "He's misinterpreting community guidelines."
Community guidelines. The same phrasing she'd weaponized against my father until, judging by his unopened letters, he'd stopped reading them. I placed the folded document in the center of the table. "A 30-year lease," I said, "between Ridgeway HOA and my grandfather." Silence closed in. Marilyn's face drained of color before she forced it steady.
"Anyone can print a contract and wave it around," she said. "That proves nothing."
The treasurer squinted at the paper.
"Is that a county seal?"
"It is," I said. "Filed, recorded, binding, and expired." A nervous ripple ran around the table. Marilyn shot to her feet, palms braced hard on the glass.
"This is ridiculous. Whatever document he has is irrelevant. Use of that land has clearly continued. There's an implied renewal. We've operated for decades uncontested."
"No," I said quietly. "That's not how leases work, and you know it." Her nostrils flared. I unfolded the lease slowly, letting the pages spread across their pristine conference table. "It covers 12 acres, I continued, "including the land this very expensive clubhouse sits on." Someone sucked in a breath. A pen clattered to the floor. Marilyn's voice sharpened.
"Stop right now."
"But there's one clause you should all hear," I went on. "It concerns what happens when the lease expires." She lunged for the paper. I lifted it just out of reach. For the first time, real fear flashed in her eyes. The board didn't look at me. They looked at her, at the way her certainty stumbled. That told me everything. I lowered the lease and traced a finger down the brittle page. "Upon expiration," I read aloud, "all structures must be removed within 180 days, unless a new lease is executed in writing." I looked up. There is no new lease. The room didn't explode so much as fracture. Chairs creaking, quick breaths, whispered expletives. "The pool," someone murmured. "The courts, everything." Marilyn slammed her hand on the table.
"Enough! He's twisting legal language. There was an understanding with his father."
A dull ache hit my chest and turned into steel. "My father was dying," I said. "He wasn't reviewing contracts. He wasn't negotiating anything, and you took advantage of that."
"You have no proof of that accusation,"
she snapped. "I have timelines. I have patterns. I have 8 years of illegal use and a stack of harassment you call enforcement. And your reaction is more proof than any signature." One of the board members, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat.
"Marilyn, did we negotiate a renewal?"
She glared at him, but the question was out in the open now. Another voice.
"Why didn't we know about this lease? Why wasn't it in the archives?"
She straightened, grabbing at her authority like a weapon.
"The board will not be swayed by fabricated drama from a man who doesn't even live in Ridgeway," she declared. "This meeting is closed. Everyone will disregard what has been said. We'll handle this internally."
"No," the treasurer said quietly. "We won't."
Her head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" "You hid this from us. If the lease expired, we're liable. You should have told the board." Her voice dropped, venom slow and deliberate. "Be very careful who you side with." He didn't flinch. "I'm siding with the truth." The air went electric. A line had been crossed, and not just between her and me. For the first time, she understood she was losing control. She turned back to me, eyes hard and bright. "You're making yourself a problem, Mr. Cole, and problems have consequences." "A public threat," I said calmly. "Bold strategy given the circumstances." We stared each other down for a long, thin second. "You're playing a dangerous game," she whispered. "I'm not playing," I said. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." Something in her face solidified into open hatred. "Then you've just declared war." She stormed out, heels cracking against the floor like gunshots. The board stared after her. I folded the lease back into my folder and moved toward the door. At the threshold, I stopped, not for effect, but because of the quiet certainty settling into my bones. "I'm not backing down," I said. And I knew I wouldn't. The county hearing room was already full when I walked in. Ridgeway residents lined the benches, a low hum of tension rolling through them. Some looked expectant, some irritated. Most assumed they were about to watch my very public defeat. Marilyn sat at the front beside the HOA's attorney, her back straight, her chin lifted. She didn't look at me, but her confidence radiated like a warning. She thought this was already won. I'd seen that look before, on people who'd only ever fought when they outnumbered their opponent. Ava slipped into the chair beside me, setting our file neatly on the table. "Everything's ready," she murmured. "Today is the pivot." The judge entered, silver hair, no-nonsense expression, the reputation of a woman who hated wasted time. The murmurs died. "Case number 27491, the clerk read. "Ridgeway Homeowners Association versus Ethan Cole regarding property boundary enforcement and alleged non-compliance." The HOA attorney rose, smoothing his suit. "Your Honor, this case is simple," he began. "For decades, Ridgeway HOA has maintained land bordering its development, including sections of the Cole Ranch. Through long-term use, upkeep, and community reliance, the HOA has established practical authority." He gestured toward me without looking. "Mr. Cole refuses to comply with reasonable standards intended to protect our residents' property values. For more than 30 years, the HOA has operated recreational facilities, pool, courts, clubhouse, on land believed by all parties to be within our domain. The Cole family never disputed this. Long-term uncontested use grants us implied rights." He flashed a confident smile. "Mr. Cole's sudden obstruction is disruptive, unreasonable, and harmful to hundreds of families." Some in the gallery nodded along. Judge Harland lifted an eyebrow. "Interesting theory," she said, "but the law doesn't care about belief. It cares about documentation." I felt rather than saw Ava smile. "Ms. Merrick?" the judge prompted. Ava rose with quiet authority. "Your Honor, the HOA's argument rests on assumption and intimidation, not law," she said. "This supposed uncontested use is a myth." She handed the clerk a document. "This is a 30-year land use lease between Ridgeway HOA and Ethan's grandfather, officially recorded with the county in 1982. It grants temporary use of 12 acres for recreational structures. It expired 8 years ago." A murmur rolled through the room. "There is no renewal," she continued, "no extension, no renegotiation. For 8 years, the HOA has been occupying Mr. Cole's land illegally." Judge Harlan studied the document, her expression sharpening. "And this clause," she said, tapping the page, "requiring removal of structures within 180 days of expiration, was that honored?" "No, Your Honor," Ava replied. "Instead, when Ethan's father declined to renew, the HOA escalated its harassment, issuing baseless violations and threatening fines to coerce compliance with fake authority. We have a full timeline." She lifted a thick binder. Board members in the audience stared at it like it might explode.
He smiled faintly. "I helped place some of those markers 40 years ago. Those lines haven't moved." "Based on the original surveys, where do the clubhouse and pool sit?" "On coal land," he said simply. "Plain as day." Gasps broke out. Marilyn finally looked at me, incredulous, then panicked. "And have you observed the HOA's behavior toward neighboring landowners?" Ava asked. Henry's expression darkened. "For years, they've been pushing their luck, intimidating folks, claiming control beyond what they own. Ethan's father held him off as long as he could, but he was sick. They picked at him until he didn't have the strength to keep pushing back." The judge leaned forward. "You're saying the HOA engaged in a pattern of coercive behavior?" "Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm saying." Marilyn bolted to her feet. "That is an outrageous lie!" "Sit down," Judge Harlan snapped. "You will speak only when addressed, Mrs. Drayton." The room froze. Ava closed her binder. "Your Honor, the HOA has no legal claim to this land," she said. "Their argument of implied renewal has no basis in contract law. They are trespassing. They have weaponized county systems to harass a landowner who asserted his rights." She set her hands on the table. "We request an immediate injunction prohibiting any further use of Ethan Cole's land by the HOA." The attorney scrambled.
"Your Honor, shutting down these facilities would devastate hundreds of families. Children use that pool. Seniors depend on that clubhouse. The community should have renewed the lease," Judge Harlan cut in. "Instead, your board chose deception and unauthorized use of private property." She lifted the lease. "This agreement is clear. Ridgeway HOA's rights ended 8 years ago. Continuing to operate on this land is unlawful." Marilyn's breath hitched, her attorney deflated. The gavel fell, loud enough to echo. "My ruling is as follows," Judge Harlan said. "Effective immediately, Ridgeway HOA is enjoined from using, accessing, maintaining, or operating any structure on Cole property. The clubhouse, pool, and courts are closed until further legal resolution." She turned to me. "All enforcement actions previously taken against Mr. Cole are null and void. Any further attempt by Ridgeway HOA to assert authority over his land will be treated as contempt." The room exploded. Shouts,
Gasps. Outraged questions.
What do you mean, closed? How could this happen? Marilyn, explain this.
Panic spread like a brush fire. Marilyn stared at the lease in the judge's hand as if it were the blade she'd never seen coming. Ava leaned toward me. "The tide just turned," she said. For the first time since I'd stepped onto the ranch after my father's funeral, I felt something settle into me. Not relief, not triumph. Authority. The kind my father had always said we held if we remembered to claim it. The injunction hit Ridgeway like a hammer. By the next morning, the community forums were in full collapse, threads packed with outrage, disbelief, and something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of me, of the truth. Screenshots of the lease circled. So did fragments of the hearing transcript. People demanded answers. How did the lease expire? Why didn't the board tell us?
Why was she threatening Ethan? The same voices that had mocked my eyesore of a ranch were now turning on the woman they'd trusted to run their lives. Around noon, Henry called. "They're calling an emergency meeting," he said. "Mord's hanging by a thread." His voice carried the rough satisfaction of a man watching justice finally catch up. I drove to the community hall and slipped in near the back. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to witness. The room buzzed with bitter energy. People spoke in sharp whispers, not about property values this time, but about responsibility, liability, betrayal. At the front, the board sat stiff behind a long table. Marilyn stood at the podium, shoulders tight, eyes sweeping the crowd like a general facing a mutiny. "The injunction was the result of a biased hearing," she began, voice straining for authority. "We intend to appeal. The community is not at fault."
"Stop lying," a man near the front said, standing abruptly. His voice shook with anger. "We trusted you. You hid the lease. You lied by omission. You gambled our money and our homes on land that wasn't ours." A woman beside him, cheeks flushed and eyes wet, raised her hand.
"My parents bought here because of that clubhouse," she said. "You told us it was guaranteed. How do you forget the one document that could shut it all down?"
Murmurs thickened into a wave. The treasurer shifted in his seat, looking older than he had 3 days earlier. Marilyn lifted her chin.
"I acted in the community's best interest," she snapped. "The Cole family has always been difficult. His father—"
"No," the treasurer interrupted, standing. "This isn't on the Cole family. It's on us. It's on you." The hall went quiet. "You bullied his father for years," he said. "You filed false complaints. You used county offices like weapons. And you never told us the entire clubhouse was sitting on leased land."
Gasps broke across the room like breaking glass.
Marilyn's composure frayed.
"You're exaggerating," she said. "I made decisions based on precedent."
"There is no precedent for forging authority," another man called out, one I recognized as the retired attorney who'd spoken up at our earlier board meeting. "This board must vote on her removal, today." Applause, shouts, agreement. It rolled over her like a tidal surge.
"You can't do this," she said, hands gripping the podium. "I built this community."
"No," someone shouted back. "You controlled it." The motion was made, the vote called. "All in favor of removing Marilyn Drayton as HOA president?" Hands rose, row after row, reluctant, furious, resigned, almost all of them. Opposed? 3 hands. One was hers. "The motion passes," the treasurer said quietly. Marilyn's face went pale, then mottled red. She held onto the podium like it might anchor her.
"You're making a mistake," she hissed. "Without me, this place will fall apart."
The new acting president shook his head. Without transparency, it already was. 2 volunteers approached, giving her a chance to walk away with what dignity she had left. She jerked her arm away and shoved through the crowd. When she passed me, her shoulder brushed mine. I felt the heat of her fury, but she didn't look up. Everything she'd built, fear, submission, unchecked power, had come down in a single week. The doors banged shut behind her. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Then the treasurer cleared his throat. "We have work to do," he said. "We have to fix this. We have to make it right. For Mr. Cole and for ourselves." The room turned toward me. No hostility now.
Something closer to respect. Maybe gratitude. I didn't go to the microphone. Today was their reckoning, not mine. 2 days after Marilyn was removed, the new board asked to meet. I walked into the small conference room behind the clubhouse where she'd once ruled, and found something I hadn't expected. No arrogance, no posturing, just tired, shaken people ready to face what they'd ignored. The acting president, now formally elected, rose. "Ethan," he said, "thank you for coming. We'd like—" He exhaled. "We'd like to make this right." Ava sat beside me, legal pad ready. "Let's hear your proposal," she said. The president slid a packet across the table. "First," he said, "a formal apology from the board and the community for the harassment, the false authority claims, the misuse of county systems, the illegal occupation of your land." His voice caught slightly on that last phrase. "Second, we want to negotiate a proper lease, one that honors you, your family, and the land that supported this community for decades." I opened the packet. A 30-year lease, fair compensation, clear maintenance duties, boundaries drawn with precision. A clause barring any future board from extending HOA authority beyond subdivision limits under any name, including visual standards. Another section established a transparent, evidence-based violation process so nobody else could be weaponized the way my father had been. Ava flipped through the pages, then nodded. "This is clean," she said, "and enforceable." The president's shoulders sagged a little with relief. "We can't undo what happened," he said, "but we can stop it from happening again." I closed the folder and looked at them. People who'd once been complicit by silence, now trying, finally, to step into responsibility. "My father spent his last years fighting you," I said, voice low. "Alone. He deserved better than what this community gave him." Heads bowed around the table. "You're right," the president said. "We owe him. And we owe you." The apology cut deeper than I expected, not because it erased anything, but because it confirmed what I'd feared since the funeral. He hadn't been paranoid, or difficult, or stubborn for the sake of it. He'd been right, and now I was finishing what he'd started. We signed the lease that afternoon. As my pen met paper, a rush of emotion moved through me, relief, grief, and something quieter than both. Closure. The land that had been used against us was now protected because of us. The board shook my hand. No forced cheer, no hollow words, just relief and a muted gratitude that this nightmare might finally be ending. The formal apology went online the next morning. Residents commented, some stumbling through regret, others clearer. "We're sorry. We trusted the wrong person.
Your father deserved better. The same people who had once muttered about my eyesore now acknowledged the truth out loud. A weight I hadn't known I was carrying began to lift. Later that week, I walked the fence line with Henry. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the posts, turning the ridge gold the way my father used to describe it. "Your dad would have liked this ending," Henry said. "He'd be proud you didn't fold." I swallowed around the knot in my throat. I hope so. He rested a big, weathered hand on my shoulder. "Son, you stood where he stood, and you didn't just hold the line." He nodded toward the horizon. "You took it back." Marilyn vanished from Ridgeway like a storm that burned out overnight and left a path of broken branches behind. The day after the apology went public, her white SUV was seen tearing out of her driveway, trunk stuffed, windows dark. Rumor moved fast. She'd been fired from a property management job in the next town. Her license was under review. The injunction was on record for any future employer to see. The same residents who had once praised her strength wouldn't even say her name now. I wasn't glad to see someone's life collapse, but I didn't mourn it either. She'd built her throne on intimidation and lies. It fell exactly the way it should have, under its own weight. The HOA itself went through something like rehab. The new board held open meetings with posted agendas and time for any resident to speak without fear of retribution. They formed a transparency committee to audit decisions made under her rule. What they found wasn't embezzlement, but it was ugly. Selective enforcement, inflated contracts, decisions made without required votes. People who had once defended her felt blindsided. Not just because of what she'd done to me, because of what she'd done to them. One of the first official changes was a boundary policy Ava helped draft herself. In simple, ironclad wording, it barred the HOA from exerting any authority beyond subdivision lines. No visual range, no community impact, no invented jurisdiction. They also adopted anti-harassment measures to restrict frivolous violations and created an appeal process requiring actual evidence for any complaint. The clubhouse stayed closed during all this, a hollow, quiet symbol of what happens when power outruns law. The parking lot sat empty. Tennis courts cracked in the sun. The pool water went flat and dark. I walked past with Henry one day, both of us taking in the silence. "Strange," he said. "Place always sounded like bees in summer. Now it's just still." "Maybe it needed to be," I answered. He glanced sideways at me. "So did you." He wasn't wrong. With the legal war finished, I could finally look at the ranch as more than a perimeter to defend. I fixed the broken post my father had once laid my hand on, replacing it with new wood, tightening the wire until it hummed. I cleared out the barn, sweeping away dust and silence. Under a tarp, I found an old metal toolbox, his initials carved into the lid. The metal was smoothed by years of touch. Inside, the smell of oil and cedar hit me like a memory. He had lived fully in these small, specific tasks. In every tightened bolt and mended hinge. Fixing the place wasn't just maintenance, it was a conversation with him. Neighbors I'd only seen from a distance began stopping by, not out of curiosity, but respect. Some brought spare lumber, others dropped off extra feed. A few came with stories. "Your dad fixed my fence when my back went out. He pulled my cattle out of a flash flood once. Never let me pay him." He stood up at the county meeting when they tried to cut water rights. Only one who spoke.
For years I'd imagined him living quietly. Now I understood he'd lived steadily, with purpose, tangled into this valley in ways I'd never bothered to see. Evenings became the best part of the day. After the work was done, I'd sit on the porch and let the sounds of the place settle around me, the creak of aging boards, a distant low from a neighbor's cattle, the wind scrubbing along the ridge. In that calm, I finally let myself think past the anger. I realized I'd been battling more than Marilyn. I'd been fighting the part of myself that believed I wasn't enough like my father to hold this place together, that I was just a visitor filling time between one life and another. But standing here, on the land he'd trusted me with, I began to understand something he'd tried to teach me from the first boundary walk. Strength isn't loud. It isn't bullying someone into submission or filing complaints until they break. It's the quiet choice to hold your ground when you're right, even if it would be easier to sell out and walk away. It's choosing integrity over intimidation. It's knowing which battles are worth losing sleep over and which lines you don't let anyone cross. One night, under a bright, cold moon, I stood at the eastern marker where he'd once pressed my hand to old wood. The new post was still raw and pale. "I kept it safe," I whispered. The wind moved through the tall grass with a sound like a long, slow exhale. A week later, the new lease took full effect and the clubhouse reopened. This time it sat there by permission, not presumption. When Ridgeway residents drove past my gate, they waved. Some stopped to apologize. Others just said thank you for holding the board accountable when they hadn't known how. Neighborhood kids rode their bikes along the path near the property line, stopping at the markers instead of cutting across like they owned the world. Respect had replaced entitlement. Accountability had replaced fear. The ranch no longer felt like a burden I'd been stuck with. It felt like mine. Not because the county said it was, or because I'd won some public fight, but because I'd finally stepped into the role my father had quietly prepared me for. Caretaker, protector, a coal. The fight had carved something permanent in me, not bitterness, not smugness, but clarity. The kind you don't inherit, the kind you earn when someone tries to take what matters and you refuse to let go. The sun was sinking behind the ridge when I stepped onto the porch. The sky glowed gold, spilling over the fields like a blessing. For the first time since I'd driven up this driveway after his funeral, the air didn't feel uncertain. It felt deserved. I leaned on the rail and watched the shadows grow long across the land my father had guarded his whole life. For years, I'd thought his stubbornness was about control, about not wanting anyone to tell him what to do. Now I saw it clearly. He hadn't been defending property. He'd been defending a story, a way of being, a promise passed from one set of hands to the next. When I came back, I'd half intended to finish the paperwork, sell the place, and go back to the noise and ease of the city, back to schedules with clear start and end times, to problems solvable with emails and meetings. But the fight had changed me. The land had changed me. Knowing what he'd carried alone changed me. Tomorrow, I'll start work on the north fence. After that, maybe I'll bring the garden back. A small thing, but forward. Not away from here. Deeper into it. As the last light drained from the ridge, I spoke the words he'd given me as a boy, the ones that had finally sunk all the way in. Some legacies aren't inherited, I said into the dark. They're protected. This one was, and I intended to keep it that way.